Well, hello there and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be teaching you 10 must-teach homeschool habits vital for every homeschooler's growth. Where am I getting these from? I'm getting them from probably the most influential man who has ever walked the planet. This man was flawless. Who am I talking about? Jesus. Let's look at habits you can teach your children, plus parables you can anchor those teachings in to help you teach them to your children. The first one I want to talk to you about, and you yourself as a homeschool parent are going to really appreciate it if the child gets this, is thankfulness. And that is because your child has so much to be thankful to you about. He has so much to be thankful, like we do, to God about. And so we want to teach our children to always say thank you and to be genuinely thankful when they get something. And we don't always want to always be reminding them to do it. And so the best way to do this is anchor it into a parable. And I find the parable of the 10 lepers who Jesus cleansed, and as they were walking, they go to Jesus and they say, Jesus, we want to be cleansed from our leprosy. And he says, go to the priest. And as they walk to the priest, they are cleansed. Now, as those 10 lepers, how many came back? One came back to thank Jesus. And so I always teach my children, I say, do you want to be like the 9 lepers or like the one leper who came back to say thank you? And the answer is obvious. The second one you want to teach is obedience. For me personally in my life, I have found it really helpful to anchor this to the Israelites grumbling in the wilderness. And they were not obedient. And what did God do? He punished them for that. And also God really hated their grumbling, so much so that they stayed in the desert for a lot longer than they needed to if they just cheerfully went about and obeyed what God wanted them to do, and something that would have led to so many more blessings. And so teach your children that God doesn't like grumbling and we don't like grumbling. And then I also like for older siblings, do you like it when your younger siblings grumble at you? That way I feel a child can really feel the effect that their grumbling is having as well. I will say with a lot of these must-teach homeschool habits we're looking at today, we as parents should be modeling that, and we as parents should have these truths firmly embedded in ourselves in order to teach it to our children. The third must-teach homeschool habit is generosity. Now, this is not just giving all your money away when you've got it, although it does include being generous with the things you have. It's being generous with your time, thinking, how can I love these other people? A great parable that Jesus said was the Good Samaritan. If you don't know the parable goes that there was a Jewish man who was on his way, I think he was on his way to Jerusalem, correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think it was. And as he was on his way, he gets attacked by the robbers. And the robbers take all of his stuff and they leave him blackened, just in a horrible mess on the side of the road to die. And if nobody's going to look after and take pity on this Jewish man, then this Jewish man is just going to die. And so soon a priest comes along the road. So the priest you would have thought would be the first person who would stop, right? He's like your equivalent to your high church leader now. You'd think he would have compassion, but he saw the man and he thought, no, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to be unclean. I'm not going to do this. And so he just walked on by. And then soon after that, a Levite comes across, and the Levites, well, they were part of the priestly clan. He should have been doing something, but he didn't. He thought the same thing. He's like, nah, it's just too much work. I'm not going to do that. So he went along by. The third person to come along by was a Samaritan. Now, Samaritans in that time, they were known for having that. There was a lot of animosity between the Jews and the Samaritans. And so you'd think if you had a Samaritan who was coming by, he would not stop because he would be thinking, die, you Jewish scum, if anything. But he didn't. It was a really surprise. He stopped with that man. He cleansed his wounds, he put him on his animal, and he took him to the nearest inn, and he said to the innkeeper, tend him, I've got to go, but I'll leave some money, and if it costs any more, I'll pay you more when I get back as well. So he was generous with his time, with his money, so many things. I'm sure he probably didn't have a lot of money, yet he had that generosity to stop and look after people who need it. So teach your children that and anchor it in that parable. The fourth one that is really wonderful for homeschooling, and especially if your children are sitting down and doing their curriculum, is diligent. That is, teach your children to do a really good job with their curriculum. No sloppy work. And I like to anchor this one into the parable of the woman who swept the house looking for the lost coin. She just kept sweeping and kept on looking until she found that lost coin. And I think on one level, this is very much salvation that we're talking about here, but they also are very much pointing us at good character traits that we want to teach our children. And we can teach our children about gospel-centered values and beliefs and salvation alongside teaching them wonderful must-teach homeschooling habits. The next thing you want to do is teach your children to do what they say they will do. Often my husband will walk out in the morning and I'll say, I'll pray for you, honey. And my little boy, who I think he just wants to look good in his father's eyes, he say, I'll pray for you too, Daddy. But I've noticed that sometimes he doesn't always pray for Daddy. And so I've started saying to him, Luke, if you say you'll pray for someone, then you need to pray for him. And so I've taught him to really value to do what he says he's going to do. And I find that you can anchor that in this passage from Matthew 21:28. I'll read the passage for you. It says, "What do you think? A man had 2 sons, and he went to the first and said, 'Son, go to work in the vineyard today.' And he answered, 'I will not.' But afterward he changed his mind and went. And he went to the other son and said the same. And he answered, 'I go, sir,' but did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father?" They said, "The first." Jesus said to them, "Truly I say to you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes go into the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him. And even when you saw it, you did not afterwards change your minds and believe him." So again, this is talking about salvation, but it's also talking, I think, about having those character traits that we do what we say. Don't overpromise and underdeliver. Instead, underpromise and overdeliver. The 7th must-teach homeschool habit is to teach your children to be content with what they've got. I like to anchor this one in the parable about the vineyard owner, but he had laborers, and at the beginning of the day he said, "I'm going to pay you a day's wage and you go and work in the vineyard." And so these people started, but then 3 hours later he gets some other people and he says, "Hey, will you work in the vineyard? I'll give you a day's wage." But they're only working 3/4 of a day. And then halfway through the day he does the same, and then an hour from the day's finishing he says to some people, "Come and work in my vineyard, I'll give you a day's pay." Anyway, when the end of the day came and the vineyard workers came in and the Lord, he paid them their wages, they all got the same thing. They all got a day's wage, whether they worked a whole day or only 1 hour of the day. And God is basically saying, well, you just need to be content with what you've been given because you agreed to work a day's wage at the beginning, and it was a blessing to get the work in the first place. But it's also transferable to being content with what you have and not looking around, because they were really content before they looked around and saw that what they thought was unfair. Seems that our children often have a very overdeveloped sense of fairness. These 2 homeschool habits I'm about to talk to you about now are probably the most important of all the homeschool habits, and that is Bible reading and prayer. The word Bible actually means to drink. This is where we get filled up. This is where we get our life from. This is where we get our ability to love other people from, is by reading the Bible, and we can pray to God for the ability to read the Bible with our children and for our children to read it on their own. Likewise, encourage them to pray. Say it is the best use of the time during their day. I remember Martin Luther, he used to pray for 3 hours, guys, a day. And people used to say, how do you have enough time to pray for 3 hours a day? And he said, it's precisely because I am so low on time that I need to pray for 3 hours a day. And I thought that was just such a wonderful thing to say in response to that. And the best thing you can be doing as a parent is to be instilling the gospel into your children all the time, regularly throughout the day, in what you say and in what you do. You can also put it in your curriculum if you're not using a curriculum that has lots of gospel content. I've made a video here about how to incorporate the gospel into every subject you teach, so go have a look at it.